Cool.
Hey y'all, what is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba Pearson, Melba for Miami, Melba for Justice, also known as the resident legal diva. And it is time for another Mondays with Melba. So last week was Juneteenth, so I hope everyone enjoyed my session with Dwight Bullard, where we really got into some interesting facts of Black history. We also dropped a number of resources in the comments so you can follow up and read more, learn more, and share the information you learned because, again, we know folks are out here banning books, but you can't ban a movement. So there's that. Also, in terms of the movement, unfortunately, in the last week or so, we lost a giant in our community, Danny Agnew, who was just amazing. He was an entrepreneur, was someone who, fought for the liberation of Black folks, fought for equality for everyone. Much love to the Roots Collective family, Black Men Build, the collective, anyone who is just feeling pain and this void that we lost in our community. I'm sending my love to you all. I had the honor of attending his homegoing service today, which was next level. I mean, we laughed, we cried. It was just a beautiful experience. And the call to action there was to complete the mission, to keep doing the work that Danny was doing. I know his brother Phil and all the other folks that were in that work. We're going to continue keeping his name and his legacy alive. And we can all do our part to keep his legacy alive by loving each other and also standing up against racism, standing up against food insecurity, economic injustice, climate injustice, all of those things that were very close to his heart. So again, rest in peace, Danny Agnew. All right, so pivoting to my amazing guest for today. You may know her because she was my deputy campaign manager when I ran for Miami-Dade State Attorney. And since then, basically, we came together as a result of the campaign, and she's become my bestie, my sister, my everything. But she is also a fierce, fierce, fierce warrior for reproductive rights, for LGBTQ equality. And so just really excited to chat with her today. Welcome to Mondays with Melba, Mary Eakins-Durand.
Thank you. And yeah, big lot of love and a very big rest in power to Danny. And one thing I say a lot when I'm training is I think it's from the Torah, but I tell people, I'm like, the work is not yours to finish, but neither is it yours to abandon. So like with really big shoes like that, we just have to keep doing forward motion and like following those paths and like keeping.
Yeah. Kids keep moving forward, right? Keep moving forward. That's the key.
Keep doing the work. Like that's how we can honor and memorialize, like keep doing the work.
Absolutely. So if you could tell folks a little bit about yourself, because again, they know you a little bit in the context of the campaign, but they don't know the broader body of work that you've done in the past, as well as what you're working on now at Equality Florida.
I'm a different woman from when we spent 2020 outside. Yeah, my name is Mary Eakins-Durand. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a field manager with Equality Florida. So I am one of a couple managers on our team. We all manage statewide. We manage programs. I do a lot of our political work. And then I also just broadly manage all the organizing that we do in South Florida. So for me, that looks like Palm Beach to the Keys. And that if you're, for folks who are not aware, Equality Florida is the largest LGBTQ civil rights organization working to secure full justice and equality for all LGBTQ folks in the state of Florida. I am an activist, a reproductive justice activist, and just an activist in general. I have been doing volunteer work and movement work for a long time, but I've been doing a lot of repro justice and repro movement work for about maybe 11 years. And so what's kind of cool now about my position with Equality Florida is that is something that we consider a cause in common, right? Which is another thing that I preach, like where our liberation is all entwined. So I do that in my personal capacity, but especially now, which I know we'll talk about, but with a ballot initiative to protect abortion rights to get protections for abortion rights on the ballot next year. I'm able to kind of marry those. So Equality Florida is lending a hand in that space. It's like a very large coalition space, so it's all hands on deck. So I've sort of married those, and that's been with legislative session ending and like merging into Pride season, which is now wrapping up, that's very much like a focus that we'll be shifting to, is to get every single petition that we can get.
Well, we're definitely going to dive into the petitions, but can you share a little bit more of what Equality Florida is focused on, like right now? Like, what are some of the key campaigns or key initiatives that folks should be aware of?
Yeah, so right now we are, well, I guess for folks who maybe weren't like as intricately following, or folks who maybe got overwhelmed because there was so many bad bills this session that it was hard to follow all of them. We had an onslaught of anti-LGBTQ, we being the royal we, all of Floridians had an onslaught of anti-LGBTQ bills filed, and nearly all of them passed this past legislative session. So Equality Florida has been very successful in leading the charge and working with partners to keep any anti-LGBTQ legislation, basically to kill it before it made it, for the last for about 24 years. And so session before last year, we saw the trans youth sports ban go through. And that was very sneaky. It came in at the 11th hour. It was very intentional to be sneaky. And that was where it almost was like opening Pandora's box. So we saw that come through. And then this session, knowing also with the shift in elections and redistricting, we now are a super minority. We saw an onslaught of them. So right now what we're dealing with is kind of the fallout of that. And depending on exactly which, like the nuance of each bill or what particular avenue we're talking about, it's a little different. So Equality Florida right now is pivoting to we'll all be doing them, but like I'll be doing several town halls in person in South Florida. And that's going to be the goal. Should be in July or very early August, because a significant portion of the bad bills that we saw and the bad legislation that we saw do circle around youth. So we want to make sure that we're setting families up and like having them prepared to enter the school year, knowing what their rights are, how those are, or what their rights are not anymore, and how that is applicable and enforceable in schools. They're not school specific, but so much of it is centered on youth that we're taking that approach. So we're kind of going into an education component, but also now is when we start seeing, a combo of things. I was going to say we'll start seeing litigation, but we are entering into suits for a lot of these bad bills. We know, like, if anybody who's kind of paying attention or follows our session and legislation like that knows that the majority of these things that have passed are unconstitutional.
Completely.
And so we don't always lead the charge in lawsuits, but we join them sometimes. We work in coalition. So we work very closely with Southern Legal Counsel, who has just seen actually like a couple victories for the LGBTQ community with with suits that were moving through their ways through the courts and recently were just determined. So it's a combo of trying to mitigate the harm that is going to happen with these bad bills. And some of that is very ambiguous, right? Like not all of it is black and white. So when we talk about the bathroom bill, it's very gray, because the solution in one school might be a student can use the gender neutral bathroom in the nurse's office, but another school might not have one. Or so it's really a lot of like trying to mitigate the harm of these bills. We saw a lot of that come to a head in June because it was Pride Month. And so we really saw an uptick in the narrative around drag queens and whether drag was illegal, whether drag was banned forever. Pardon me. And that's tricky too, because sometimes if you don't really dive into a bill and you're just looking at headlines or you're getting the too long didn't read version, now, we have folks responding to things that aren't accurate. So we have folks shifting their prides in response to drag being illegal, but drag's not illegal. It's more nuanced than that. So a lot of it was educating and a lot of that was breaking it down. So we also did town halls for organizations, nonprofits, boards that throw prides all over the state. We did that about 2 months ago, letting them know, like, here's what's actually legal, here's what's actually not illegal. We also know that the way that these are interpreted and enforced by this administration are not the same way they were written. Like, we're very intentionally playing a game where bills are written very vaguely so that enforcement isn't really defined and
inconsistent, which is a problem.
Yep. So very much have shifted my work as I wean out of Pride into an sort of an education and like a harm mitigation approach, for lack of a better word. And And then towards the end of the year, as we know, like next year's a big election year, we have this ballot initiative going on. So that's a lot of what we'll be focusing our work on too. And because next year's session starts so early, anyone that does movement work that is related to like legislative session knows that like by November, we're in committee week. So that's sort of where we start living in that space again by the end of the year.
Yeah. And it makes sense. And definitely to circle back to some of the victories we've had in the last, week or so have been really positive. For instance, one court declared that the law that targeted kids being able to attend drag performances, which is one of those nuances that we had mentioned.
That made people think drag was illegal.
Right. That was declared unconstitutional. We know there's going to be an appeal, but at the trial court level, that was found to be unconstitutional. The law that prevented the use of Medicaid funds to be able to pay for gender affirming care, that was struck down as being unconstitutional and discriminatory. So again, we know there's going to be an appeal, but on the trial court level, they were said, no, thank you. And then more importantly, I mean, those are both important, but something that's like kind of flying under the radar is that there was a case around the state of Florida or any state's ability to sue the federal government around federal policy. So the governor was suing the Biden administration around their immigration policy, saying that it was, too, loosey-goosey or whatever. And the Supreme Court was like, and the higher courts were like, no, actually, we can't create a precedent where a state can just sue the feds because we're just going to have constant chaos. So that is going to impact, for instance,
that's huge.
That's huge because the governor is intending, I don't know if it's filed yet or it has been filed, but there was a lawsuit floating around against the Biden administration around how public schools as public universities are accredited in Florida because there was the threat to take away the accreditation as the governor was hell-bent on stripping DEI and CRT and anti-woke and all of this. Well, the feds were like, but we can take your accreditation because now you're not following the federal guidelines around what education should look like. So taking away his ability to sue also means that we might see a rollback of some of these policies because it's unconstitutional. So that's
even extra little victories is that, and not every judge, but like we know how stacked the courts are right now. So when these things are being shot down, that these are judges that are not necessarily all friendly, but at some point this all becomes an exercise in democracy, right? So like, even if you're very conservative, even if you were a Trump appointee and you're in these stacked courts in Florida, at some point, even these people are saying, this is so far out of the realm of what is legal, of what is constitutional, of what is acceptable, or these are very slippery slopes. This is how democracy starts to erode. And we're already seeing that in Florida, like we're past the where it starts part, but that makes it even more impressive because we're not always going up, with friendly judges or like, Florida is not and has not historically been a very blue or a very progressive state. So it's not like we have years of like very fair judges that have been appointed, like we're kind of up against it every time we file suits in Florida.
Yeah, for sure.
That bill though and those are the ones that are kind of, as they move through session, are a little bit less sexy sometimes. We saw one that got TP'd, but it was about journalists, right? And what they're allowed to write about elected officials. And thank God it got TP'd. But these are the ones that will have, they all will, but have huge implications. I don't know if you caught it. I just saw it today, but DeSantis at a campaign event in Texas, near the border, of course, said that if he's elected president, he will eliminate birthright citizenship. So if your parents came here and they're immigrants, but you were born here, you're not a citizen now. So when we talk about the dangers of DeSantis in Florida too, we're here, like we're in it. It's terrible, but also it's an alarm. Like we're warning the world, like with more power and at a national level, these are the things that you're going to start seeing. We've seen a lot of them already in Florida, coming just shy of to where he doesn't have power to do things, but like he's pushing the envelope every day.
Absolutely. And especially that one, it just kind of makes me think back to our conversation 2 weeks ago with Tremaine on Mondays with Melba, where she was talking about the immigration bill and all the things that were floated and what really ended up coming out of the bill. But when you think about that whole birthright aspect, you can have two parents that are immigrants. Just because you're here and you don't have citizenship doesn't mean that you are an undocumented person, right? Like you could be here with a 10-year visa, right? Or whatever.
Visa, you could have a green card,
a student visa,
you could be a permanent resident, like
exactly. And you have a kid, and now, oh, your kid can't be a citizen because like that's just insane. But
egregious, like completely outrageous. And that's a lot of what we're seeing. And I think, right now, I also feel like when you talk about what work are we doing, Equality Florida is also, I mean, in general, so many movement orgs, all these coalition spaces, but like we are very much pivoting to like a resist this sort of fascism message. And a lot of that looks like sounding an alarm so that people who are across the country or are in safer states or just are in states where they're dealing with their own BS and they're not looking at this nuance, know that when you start seeing this person on a national stage, be alarmed.
Be afraid, be very, very afraid. So pivoting one more aspect about this, and then we're going to switch to talking about the petitions. But so this month is Pride Month, right?
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. And what does Pride mean to you?
In general or this year? Pride was born from protest. And so I always keep that like at the center of like my feelings about Pride and centered in my heart. I very much, you and I have done this together. Like I love Pride. I love glitter. Parades are great. I love feathers. Give me drag queens. But I've always sort of been centered on like the political messaging behind Pride. It's been a lot easier for that to get lost for folks because Pride very much looks like for profit and a rainbow cop car and AT&T has a rainbow logo, but I always center that sort of like feeling about Pride. But for me, it just means like out and proud, like be who you are. I very much encourage folks to celebrate who they are. And Pride is sort of just an avenue to do that. And it's a declaration, right? Like rights that we've earned and fought for, equal rights. Actually, today is Marriage Equality Day. Today's the anniversary of when the Obergefell decision came down and things like that, right? Like just being able to celebrate. And so for me, it's just joy. It's just queer joy. It's just being able to have fun, go out in the streets, be who we are. And like, it's extra, it's like you can be incredible and your culture is great and you're Caribbean and sorry about this.
The puppy has a lot to say about Pride. The puppy clearly cares a lot about Pride.
Apologies. But very much this year, I have found the climate and the feelings shift a lot back to like protest and what that looks like and why there was protest and what we were protecting. And so for me, I'm always living in the space that was two women of color, one Latina woman and a Black woman. And that's how this was born. And so those are the spaces that I like to live in. And the energy around Pride this year has been very much in that vein.
Yeah, because, everybody keeps forgetting, like the first Pride was basically almost a riot, right? Like it was
a riot. Yeah.
This was Stonewall in Greenwich Village, like a stone's throw from where I went to, undergrad and just, the history of all these folks who could not be themselves and live their lives and were being harassed by police, marginalized by society. And while we've seen a lot of improvements over the course of the last decade since Stonewall, and we've seen the fact that, now people that identify as LGBTQ can get married, can have their unions be legally recognized and be able to adopt kids, have each other on each other's insurance or life insurance or whatever the case may be.
Just be able to be an emergency contact and make life-saving decisions for your partner.
Exactly. We've seen a lot of improvement and we have to be grateful, especially for Obergefell and all of that. But again, we run the risk with all of this anti-trans rhetoric, anti-LGBT rhetoric of sliding back into the dark ages where
these rights are not guaranteed.
Yeah.
We're seeing them chipped away. Now, I got distracted with this chaos animal over here, but part of what I was saying too is like very much like being Caribbean or from a Caribbean country and being super proud and like being very deep in your culture, but then also still saying it's carnival. Like we are loudly celebrating who we are. We are dressing up. We are playing music. And like that is very much the feeling that I get surrounding Pride. It's just a time to amplify that queer joy, you know? And in these years, like it's also become an education moment recently because a lot of people don't know a ton of queer history. And sort of just get the top notes, you know, like marriage equality passed or didn't pass, kids can be adopted or can't be adopted, things like that. But bringing folks back into the space where we can't take those for granted. They're not guaranteed. Just like they came, they can go. And so it's sadly, it's not just a win and you're done. Like it's a constant work in progress.
Yeah, I want to say Coretta Scott King had a great quote about that basically like you don't get to rest on your laurels. Like civil rights work is never done. Like you always have to keep fighting to ensure that you keep the rights that you've won and then push forward to get the rights that you still have yet to get. So that's,
and making sure that the infrastructure that we support, whether that looks like elected officials, where we spend our dollars, things like that, is, you know, even in a passive time where everything feels great, and unlike right now where it feels like we're in the middle of fighting for our lives in a civil rights movement, is working to make sure that the infrastructure that is in place protects those things. Like we'll get to talking about abortion, but I have heard so many parents say, mothers, but parents say, my child now has less rights than I did. And like, that's what you want to avoid. Like there should never be a time where we're having less rights. We should just always be chipping away towards having more rights.
Exactly. The more the merrier. Because the reality is this isn't a pie. Like if I, have certain rights, that doesn't take away from your rights. If you have certain rights, that doesn't take away from my rights.
And I think that's been a difficult conversation to have. And I think, especially in abortion work, we call them antis, but like a lot of opposition to all of these things, not just queer stuff, but like racist folks and bigots. We see that like this deep concern that like someone is living in a way that you don't agree with or doing something that you don't like. And I always try to pivot that narrative to live and let live. If you're not doing harm, like you are very free to wake up and just not get gay married. And you are also very free to just not have abortions, So like very much in a way that if we're not doing harm to other folks, like just allowing folks to live, and like this strong, it's really building, but this strong innate like hatred to where you want to go out of your way to harm folks and take away from them. Like you said, it's not pie. It doesn't make your life better. You don't earn more rights as others get eliminated. It's not a video game, like,
right.
So
yeah, exactly. So pivoting to abortion rights, tell us a bit about this petition drive. What's the goal? And more importantly, where can people sign? And how can people sign up to help?
Perfect. So really quick, like 101. And this, it's this particular right that we're trying to like protect and, enshrine in the Florida Constitution to protect is super important. But also, this is a citizen-led ballot initiative. That is super important too. It is a huge component of democracy, and it is an exercise in democracy to get this on the ballot. And I say that because though we've had success in seeing that before, we also know that voting rights, access to citizen initiatives and stuff are getting chipped away at. Literally every year they're trying to make it harder. So next ballot initiative that comes out is going to have different restrictions than this one. Those have already passed. So a lot of it also is like, we need to push back. Right now for movement, we are in a space where the strongest, most protective, most feasible thing that we can do to protect abortion access after so many sessions, and abortion is just always going to be a talking point. It's always centered in campaigns. Single issue voters that don't even have abortions or are not childbearing people will still like center entire campaigns about them. Is that it's really important that we get this on the ballot, and it's really important that we try to protect our right to get things on the ballot. It's been uphill in trying to get abortion protections in session, so this is the way that we're going to do that. And then we're going to circumvent any issues we have in the future where we may again be in a super minority or not have the balance of power that we need to protect these rights. So it is a currently something that we are still allowed to do. And so our other bestie, right? Like we saw the medical marijuana ballot initiative get put on the ballot. Subsequently, it passed like a few years ago. This year, I'm almost embarrassed to say I'm not very, very deeply following, but we're seeing a ballot initiative for recreational marijuana. And if I'm not mistaken, they just met the threshold of petitions.
Yeah, I think it was an issue with the Supreme Court language, but I think they got to the number they needed. Yeah. And Amendment 4. Don't forget Amendment 4. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to be expected. But we've seen these and we've seen the success, right? And like we also know that after Amendment 4, the DeSantis administration started trying to parse out ways. Like we got this passed and now they're trying to find ways where they can thwart it at every pass, right? So we expect to see things like that, but this is the most concrete way. You know, they can't overturn the will of the voters. They can try to stifle it and they can try to put in like regulations to make it difficult, which we super duper deeply saw still are seeing with Amendment 4 issues. Yeah. But the abortion ballot initiative is really cool. It was born from abortion activists and organizations and nonprofits that do this work. There is actually an existing reproductive justice coalition in the state of Florida. It's been for years. We meet every week in or out of session. So a lot of us have, like us being like broadly organizations and activists, have been at this table. So one thing that is really incredible about this, and just know that for the most part, if someone is running a viable ballot initiative campaign, it's not a small lift. Like very few folks that do this work will move forward with that kind of work unless they believe that there's a path to win, right? And there is. So we've seen polls that were put out. We know that abortion polls and has bipartisan support nationwide, always pretty much, but in excess of 70%. So we have seen like very astronomical data to tell us that this is not only a good move, but that it is viable and possible, and it is the right time to do it, because that has a lot to do with it too. You know, even folks like we talk about more conservative folks that generally err on the side of being anti-abortion. When the climate is less hostile, it feels less urgent. So because of their values, they may decide not to play. But right now, folks are really seeing like we are going to lose rights. And so now I think even people who generally would give you the very like, I'm not political, are now interested in helping and getting it on the ballot and all of that. So there is a PAC that is running this. It's called Floridians Protecting Freedom. There are a lot of names that you would know on the executive committee and folks that were at the table planning this before it even launched, which we are just about a month and a half, I think, and it launched on May 8th. So it's still fairly new. Planned Parenthood, ACLU, Women's Voices of Southwest Florida, Florida Rising, SEIU, unions. It's just a lot of folks are at the table. So we also, it's great because we have voices from everywhere, and knowing that we're all on the same page is really cool. And then leading the charge is Lauren Brenzel, is the campaign manager. And Lauren Brenzel, I know you know Lauren, but Lauren was a statewide organizing director for Planned Parenthood for years on years on years, and is just a total bad bitch. So we are in very good hands. And I will tell you, I'll give you some updates, but about whatever it is now, 6-7 weeks into this, we're slaying. It's going great. Yep.
Such great news. So then where can folks go if they want to sign a petition? Can they do it online? Do they have to print it out? Like
I'll tell you right now. So you cannot sign it online. That is one thing about ballot initiatives. And honestly, it's for the best. But the ballot initiatives need to be wet ink signatures. However, for folks that it can be a little bit difficult, there is, and I'm opening it for you now just because I want to make sure I get the URL right when I read it to you. But Floridians Protecting Freedom has the ballot available on their website. It is, you can type it in, which is cool. So if you have, for folks that have like issues with that, you can type on your ballot, but you do need to have a wet ink signature. And you are able, sorry, I'm kind of multitasking here trying to get this thing. So it's FloridiansProtectingFreedom.com. You can print out the ballot there. You can type in your ballot there and print it and then sign it. So for folks who like have issues, with writing or mobility and stuff like that, that's a good way to do it. Also really important to mention, just because one of the biggest tragedies of this is if a petition is filled out and then discarded, right? So like doing that is a great way to mitigate them being legible. And the process for this, just really briefly, for any ballot initiative, is when you sign the petition, it goes to the supervisor of elections in your county. So even though this is a statewide effort and it will get on the ballot for this in Florida, they are processed at the county level with supervisors of elections, very much like vote by mail. So even if you have filled out a petition with all the correct information, if they can't read that it's Melba Pearson, they can't verify who it is. It gets tossed out. The campaign is brilliant. So there is a curing effort happening that is proactive, because supervisors of elections won't cure bad petitions. One of the updates I was going to give is that right now the validity rate is at about 94%, which is crazy good.
That's
crazy
awesome.
Good. Yeah. Folks are really, really, really doing the work to do this the right way and to make sure that we get it on the ballot and get it done. So you can go to FloridiansProtectingFreedom.com. You can also, which you're welcome to put my Equality Florida contact information when this goes posted up on, folks can reach out to me. There's a lot of ways that you can get involved. So the way that these things work is very much like a campaign. So it is very much a volunteer initiative. As of last week, we had obtained 240,000 petitions already, which is well outside of the goals that were set. It exceeded them by far. Over 60,000 of those are just from volunteers throughout the state. Wow. I keep a clipboard in my car. If you're at a Pride or something, you're definitely going to probably be canvassed by someone, but like we are all really doing the work. I am currently hosting our Wilton Manors office as a hub. And so what that looks like is folks can come for supplies and petitions, clipboards, etc. They can drop off completed petitions to us. I will train them on how to canvass. I can also do that virtually for folks who can't make it to our office. That's not an in-person requirement. And getting folks set up to do that. And so we have hubs all over the state. It is a live, a real-time map on the website. So if you also just decided to print the petition and collect some from your network and your friends and do some relational, organizing, you can find a hub nearest to you. They can also be mailed directly, but if you can drop them off at a hub, it's ideal because there'll be a quality control check. And also they can give you any more supplies. So if you want to take a new blank stack with you, you can do that at no cost. And so that's sort of the way. As far as involvement goes, volunteering. So volunteering to collect petitions, volunteering to cure petitions. So if talking to folks, going outside, being in the heat, none of that is your jam and you don't want to do that, we are also literally going through petitions that have errors on the front end and calling folks and saying like, hey, you were met by someone to collect a petition, and I see here that you forgot to put your date of birth, or you never dated it, or you did everything but sign it. And so we can get them a new petition and then submit a complete, accurate petition. Also, if none of, time, talent, treasure, testimony, we need all of those things. If you can pull this work into any of your spaces. So if you're part of a club, a caucus, a reading, a book club, anything of that nature, groups that you can bring it to, bring it in, do some relational organizing. And whether you can bring it in as a topic to discuss or a training or a recruitment opportunity, or if you can just bring petitions into your spaces. And then the last one is money. These campaigns need money. So all the heart in the world couldn't just get this on a ballot. There is also a paid canvassing component of this, and the two of them together is what is keeping this really live momentum. So we need money to pay canvassers. We need money to pay FedEx. We need money to print petitions. So for a lot of folks, honestly, a very great way to get involved is to make a donation so that this campaign can sustain the work. Because this is also for next year's ballot, it's time limited. So not only do we need to sustain the work, these goals that we're killing, we need to keep upping them. So we can't just keep going at the speed we're at. We need to keep getting bigger and have more paid canvassers, more petitions, more volunteers. And so donations aid that as well.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you need to collect close to 1 million petitions to be able to qualify to get on the ballot, much like
we are actually saying about 1.2.
1.2.
The
Okay.
threshold is just under 900,000, but accounting for errors is what we're taking in. But a big component of that is also why we're trying to cure them up front, so that we can keep track of valid data. Because ideally, it's a Herculean effort to get a 1.2 million petition signed.
Yeah, again, remember that from Amendment 4. It was brutal. And again, by the way, just for folks who may not remember, Amendment 4 was the ballot initiative that was in Florida in 2018 that gave returning citizens, people that were formerly incarcerated and had felony convictions, the right to be able to get their voting rights back as long as they've completed their sentences and were not convicted of murder or a sexual offense. And that is something that passed with about 64% of Floridians voting yes. And then in 2019, we saw the legislature led by the governor try to roll all of that back. But we cannot be deterred. We still need to move forward and sign these petitions. I'm going to post the link in the comments so that folks can be able to not only go on, do it and fill it out and bring it to Hub, find the Hub closest to you, but also share it with friends, family, everybody in your network. And I will also put Mary's contact information at Equality for you to be able to reach out to her again if you want to volunteer, if you want to make a donation, and if you want to be trained on some of these things we've talked about. So there we have it.
And just for folks that might be a little psyched out, it's very little to fill out. It's very simple. So when I say training, I mean, I just want folks to feel comfortable, but this is easy. I myself am finding that these aren't tough conversations to have. Even folks that, I was at Pride several times this month, and a lot of that community is not childbearing folks or folks who really follow that stuff, but they very much believe in rights and autonomy. So if you're feeling a little intimidated, I can coach you through that too. But I am having easy conversations with people that want to help. And so I'm not, it's not a hostile sort of space. And you can also be judicious about where you want to do petition collecting.
Exactly. Well, Mary, you rock.
I believe that we will win.
We will. I have no question in my mind, because again, looking at the numbers, it's clear that in Florida, we're somewhere around 65 to 70% of Floridians believe in access to abortion. Nationally, the numbers are about the same.
And that's high.
That's high. That's higher than most other issues that are, socially focused. So the evidence is there. The will is there. We just got to do our part to complete the mission.
Yep.
So with that, Mary, I love you. Thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you for being on Mondays with Melba and dropping a little knowledge for us today. And for all of y'all, next week is July 4th weekend, so I may be dark that week. We'll see, but I will keep you posted. And of course, stay engaged, stay woke. Take good care.
And celebrate July 4th by signing a petition to get abortion on the ballot. Go abortion.
Yes.